Hello my bookish friends out there in BookTube land, and welcome to this episode of Tristan and the Classics. In this episode I am giving you a video that you have been asking for ages, and I finally made it. I cannot tell you how difficult this has been to put together. The amount of walks I have been on trying to come to a conclusion for my decisions puts that fellow who ran from Marathon to Athens to report on the Persian victory, puts him to shame. I've covered much more distance than him trying to work my way through this. And the topic of it is ranking Jane Austen's 6 major works in the order in which I appreciate them most. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? So ranking the 6 major works of Jane Austen, that's our topic. This has been difficult. If you have watched a previous video of mine, you'll know which one's coming in 6th place. It's to do with my literary unfavourites. However, the reason this is difficult is because Jane Austen's books are so good, okay? Even the one I don't particularly like is still excellent. Now, what's unusual is how many men don't read Jane Austen because they think it's a little too light and airy and, you know, to use the old-fashioned word, girly, as if it's just about getting married and frolicking around like that. Jane Austen's books, I've spent some time thinking, why is that? And how can I explain to others just how good Jane Austen is? And then something came to my mind. Years ago, I went on a holiday. And I visited this very small lake, which was actually in a copper mine. And it had a remarkable blue colour from the copper sulfate. If I ever go there, I'll make a video of it. But while I was staring at it, it was completely flat, undisturbed. And then it was very clear. And then I began to realise just how deep it went. Like it went down, down, down. I couldn't make the bottom out, but I could work out from the sides just how far it was going. And then it dawned on me just how clear it was. And then I realised, not just for its colour, but for other things as well, it was an exceptional little pool, which I'd never seen the likes of before, or since actually. And that's Jane Austen. It can look unimpressive or just light, like a pond to start with. Pleasant little pond, something to splash about in. But if you are a real thinker when it comes to your reading, you'll begin to see just how deep Jane Austen's observations of the world go and how clear her perception is. So much so that other than the manners and the behaviours and the dress of the day, people have not changed all that much in the way we interact with one another. On top of that, all of her books focus on some different part of society, all related, but they're not all the same as if they're all just love stories, even though it involves getting suitors, because that was an important thing for young women back in the day. And so with that in mind, now I want to take you through the books in the order I particularly rank them, starting with 6 and working to my favourite. And I'll give a brief synopsis of each book. So the first up, well, no, not the first, in 6th place. Now, I think this was the second one she actually wrote. The first one she wrote, I believe, was Northanger Abbey, although it was only published after her death. Then I believe Sense and Sensibility came next, and followed by Pride and Prejudice. Sense and Sensibility is on my list of literary unfavourites, and by that I mean that it's just not a book that particularly resonates with me. However, having said that, I understand just how good this is. I understand and deeply appreciate the perceptive powers of Jane Austen when writing this book. Because in the book, it focuses primarily around Eleanor and Marianne, two economically stricken sisters living in a small cottage with their mother. And they have very different personalities, but they've still got to navigate their way with no economic clout, with no clout of reputation, and with no political clout. They've got to navigate their way into relationships, because that's the day and age, of course. But Eleanor is sense in this. She is very pragmatic. She keeps herself under control. She has a beautiful way of dealing with people. In fact, I really like Eleanor. And then her younger sister, Marianne, who's played by Kate Winslet in the film back in the late 90s, I think it was. She is sensibility, as is her mother. Now, sensibility is a particular ideology of its day. It comes and springs from the Romantic movement. The Romantic movement kicked against the purely rational method of judging the world, which had come from the Renaissance beforehand. And now people wanted to get back in touch with just the splendour, the awe, the beauty of things, not having to measure it all out and be totally rational and pragmatic. In fact, we're seeing a mirror of those events happening again today in society. Now, what happens is Marianne, of course, gets, if you've read the book, she finds somebody and Eleanor likes somebody, and but there's intrigue and there's twists and turns, and Marianne is full of sensibility. In other words, if you're poetic, if you're romantic, you show it with deep emotion. You fall into, trances of wonder over a flower. She loves poetry and dotes upon it. She can't keep her emotions in check, not just because that's her nature, but because showing them to her shows your sensibility, which means your refinement. However, times are changing. And on top of that, Jane Austen realises the fakery, the cant that is in sensibility, and that while any ideology has its value, it can be pushed to extremes. Eleanor comes off much better because she's sensible. However, could she learn something from her younger sister's ability to enjoy the moment, to let her guard down a little bit? What Jane Austen does here is she's always looking for balance. And that's one of the things, do you know what? That's one of the things that runs through all of her works. Balance, reasonableness, when to bend and move, and not taking things to the extreme. Now you have to see what happens as you're introduced to various different characters as they go into London to join the Bon Ton, which is the good set, and the heartbreak and heartache and a measuring of characters, but not too judgmental actually, a measuring of characters being understood according to the pressures of the day. That's Sense and Sensibility. I hope that you can understand how good I do think this book is, even though I don't find it the most enjoyable story. The fact that I've been able to talk about it like this for quite a few minutes should tell you that the book is much deeper than it appears on first reading. Spend time trying to see what Jane Austen saw in society beyond the manners, beyond the actions. That's the critical thing with Austen. She writes it so clearly, it seems like it's just a splashy pool, but it's deep. The longer you stare, the further down it goes. So in 5th place on my ranking of Jane Austen's novels, I have put Northanger Abbey. Now, once again, I want to say, just because it comes in 5th does not mean it's not a good story. In fact, this is a thoroughly entertaining read, in my opinion. It made me smile and chuckle in a few places, and I don't particularly chuckle too much at Jane Austen. I smile, but this is the one that aroused quite a giggle from me. In the book, our main character is Catherine Morland, a young girl who, under the auspices of her aunt, whose name escapes me right now, she goes into society, and, she's not from a particularly well-to-do family, but she goes into society and we see her in Bath. Now, a lot of you who are into the Regency and Jane Austen, you know that Bath is a particular part of the grand tour of Britain where everybody moved around for the seasons doing certain things, and you went there to see and be seen, going to the Bath pump room and going to the Bath balls and halls and soirees. Now, Catherine gets introduced to a whole set. She's been quite, sheltered, living her life through stories. And then she gets introduced to the set, the Bon Ton. Now, before I talk about the set, I just want to highlight a point about this book. In this book, Jane Austen writes with a purpose again, and it's an ironic satirization of the romantic novel, particularly the Gothic novel. And if you want to understand the Gothic novel better, please do yourself a favour and go and watch my video on the 8 aspects that make Gothic literature. Honestly, I think you'd enjoy it. So anyway, that's what Jane Austen is doing in this book. Again, on the surface, it looks like just a basic story and a bit of happiness and frivolity and, you know, light and frothy and sparkling, I think is how she once described one of her books, Pride and Prejudice. But there's a lot to it. It takes a keen perception of how particularly young girls of the day would read these thrilling novels from the Romantic period, the Gothic, the beginning of sensationalist writing, and would try and interweave it into their lives. Now, I'm not going to give anything away about this, but when she starts off in Bath, what I love is how she gets drawn into a group of friends, notably Isabella, who is this beauty who seems to be really in command of herself, takes it upon herself, although a peer, to try and educate Catherine on how to behave. She's good with the boys and flirtation. You have Mr. Thorne is one of them. What's the other guy? It's been a long time since I've read this. Mr. Tilsey? Is it Tilsey or Tilney? Mr. Tilney. What's so great is she captures youth so well. Youth that is exactly the same today. Every period of youth, including my own, we think we're unique, we're different from everybody else. You read books like this, nothing has changed. Even to the point of, you know, guys liking their cars. Because you've got them in here with riding their carriages. And talking about, you know, how wonderful they are. It's quite amusing. And so the story goes, and how this interweaving of Gothic literature and how she perceives life goes together, and how it's a bit incongruous and doesn't always match up, and the twists and turns that accompany a lot of all of Jane Austen's works. So that's Northanger Abbey in 5th place. Again, it's 5th not because it's a bad book, it's just she wrote so many good books. And if you want to start with Jane Austen, I mean, if you're looking for something deep and meaningful amongst Jane Austen, I wouldn't start with this. I'll tell you what to start with later. But if you want to just dip your toe in her witty way of writing, and that she observes, she captures people, she's obviously watched and thought, why do people behave like that? Then I would read Northanger Abbey. It's very, very good, and it's very light to get through. It's also very short. So number 5, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, obviously. Could I just take a moment to say that if you enjoy classic literature and you're enjoying this video and videos like this, hit the subscribe button and do me a favour, share it with someone whom you know likes reading. Or if you know someone who loves Jane Austen, please share this video with them, because that really helps the algorithm and it really helps me keep producing this kind of content. Because sometimes videos like this, I'm so excited about them, but not many people see them. You hitting subscribe and sharing does wonders for my channel, so I thank you for that. If you did want more exclusive content, visit my Patreon, where we've got a community of classic book lovers, and we're all on a great literary adventure together in getting more out of the classics and understanding just how story works and influences our lives as humans. Now, back to our list. So we're looking at what comes in 4th place in my ranking. Now, I have to say, in some respects, I could argue for all the next 4 to be in number 1 place. I'm going to upset all of the Austenites who hold strong opinions about various books, but all 4 of these books are so good that they all have a particular place in my heart. So one of the things I've decided to do, this is where I did all the walking around trying to work out how I'm going to judge these books. I've had to take what I would say, I've been quite a critical approach to the way that they're written, the observations within them, preference for story obviously factors in a little bit, but it's mainly down to observation, keen insight, because that's what Austen is so good at. She just questions the behaviours of people, the accepted standards, the mores of the day. It's not so much manners she has a problem with as motivations and societal mores, which become somewhat absurd when taken to their nth degree. And even as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about switching two of them around. But I'm going to stick with the decision I made. And this one's probably going to shock a lot of Austinites because it is a book. You could argue this is her most accomplished book, but I'm not ranking it first. Actually, I wouldn't even say it's her most accomplished. I'd say it could be her second. But it is Jane Austen's Persuasion. I don't know if you can see that. This is the Everyman edition. Persuasion is just... I remember the first time I read it. It really struck me because I was at that point where I'd read Pride and Prejudice and thought I'd enjoyed that, but thought I'd give another go to Jane Austen, and was blown away by the depth of this book. It's quite short again. This and Northanger Abbey are the two shortest. Pride and Prejudice is quite short too. But Persuasion follows, what's her name? Oh, Anne Elliot. Now, Anne Elliot is the daughter of Sir Elliot of Kellynch Hall, and when she was 19, she fell in love with a captain called Captain Wentworth. But her friend, her much older friend, influenced her not to court him, not to accept his proposal, and the whole family thought that this young captain, was beneath the ranking, the status of the family of Kellynch Hall. The father, in fact, at the beginning, we're told that he likes to go through the histories, the family trees, and see how noble some of his ancestors are. But in the story, I'm not giving anything away, early on, well, we start the story 7 years later, and we find that the family has fallen into pecuniary hard times. And so they're renting out Kellynch Hall to somebody else and taking up cheaper accommodation in Bath, which is still, classy. It's still the done thing. But actually they've got financial difficulties. Now, the people who move into Kellynch Hall know Captain Wentworth, and Wentworth comes back from the Navy because the Napoleonic Wars are finished. Wentworth is now quite wealthy from his endeavours in the Napoleonic Wars. And the path of him and Anne will crisscross. Now, amongst all of this, typical of Jane Austen, you will see the different characters all vying for attention, mainly the women vying for suitors, and how others get interested in Captain Wentworth, even though they're supposedly affianced to somebody else. The whole book is about, guess what? Persuasion. The genius of this is the observation that Austen must have made, that everything in our life, in communication, overall, I should say, not everything, is about persuasion. We all, by our comments, our opinions, our advice, even our throwaway remarks based on unthinking, you haven't really weighed up a matter, but you just give your opinion, persuades or dissuades people from taking courses of action. Should Anne have turned down Wentworth when she did? Was it the right advice? Was the advice even well thought through? All the way through, you are going to see the way people conduct themselves is because they've been persuaded to a certain way of thinking. I actually love it. Is it her older sister, Mary? And she's very into being part of society. And so you see her and her father in Bath waiting for people to visit, to take society. And they're so bored. The ennui and the sheer, loss of verve in life because you're constricted, you're persuaded that this is the correct way to behave, to be held in esteem and all that kind of... It's absolute nonsense. And I think this is the very the top of Jane Austen's critique of that silly, absurd behaviour. The social mores, again, the manners are fine, but they've become too restrictive, too calculated, to the point of shutting out life. Something you'll notice about all of Jane Austen's main characters is they have a connection to the earth. There is an element of them where they don't subscribe to the perfect way of doing things, bar one of them. And we'll come to that one soon. And that's what this book's about. And, you know, the story of Anne and Captain Wentworth and all the things that circulate around them and the qualities that a person should possess, what good character is as opposed to good form. That all comes out, which isn't unique to this one book, but is probably most brilliantly expressed. This book is a sober book, very sober, not light, not frothy. And if you're looking for something to bite on, to chew on, Persuasion could be well the place to start with, if that's your type of book. But I encourage everyone who hasn't read Persuasion to read it and take some time to ponder upon it. And ask yourself whether things have changed, and ask yourself how freely you give advice and opinions, unthinkingly, and whether you should or not. So that was in 4th place, sadly. But could also tie for first if it needed to. So there you go, Persuasion. So we're into the top 3. And in 3rd place, I think I can guess what the majority of you would think I've got in 3rd place. But I'm going to say I reckon the majority of you are wrong. In 3rd place, Pride and Prejudice. I love this book. What an amazing book. And by the way, the BBC renditioning of the book from 1995, is it, with Colin Firth and Elizabeth Al, is just out of this world. It's the most faithful rendition of Pride and Prejudice on TV. Now, the films are also very good. The cinematography in the later films is great, and the costume, but the story, BBC gets it best. The book, the cleverness of this book is the irony in so many of the lines. One of the greatest ironic lines, which is missed all of the time by readers, is when Elizabeth keeps calling Darcy proud. It's a case of when you point one finger, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. Most people say Darcy has pride in this because Elizabeth says he's proud. That's surface reading. Stare into the pool. Go deeper. What kind of person calls another person proud? Who says, he is more proud than I am? That's like saying, I'm humble. Well, when you make that comment, you've pretty much lost your humility, haven't you? And what's the converse? Pride. So the story, as a lot of you know, is the Bennet family. And our main protagonist is Elizabeth Bennet, the second eldest of, 5 daughters? Her elder sister is Jane. Now, the Bennet family, the problem is, Mr. Bennet has 5 daughters. So on his death, they won't inherit the house. It will pass on to the nearest relation, which happens to be a cousin called Mr. Collins, who is a vicar and is one of the most delightful characters in literature. Not because he's good or because he's approachable or likeable, but because he's so oily and unctuous. And obsequious is the word. He wants to find a little bit of position in society, but you'll have to read the book. I don't want to give things away. He is played brilliantly in the BBC version. The problem is, if none of the girls marry Mr. Collins, then on their father's death, they're practically homeless. They're without any anchoring, which is going to affect their reputation and their chances to be paired up with somebody. Now, the story starts with one of the most famous lines. It is a truth universally accepted that a man in possession of a large fortune must be in want of a wife. Again, that's an ironic thing. She's actually criticising a firmly held opinion amongst the drawing room ladies. That, you know, oh, all men need a wife. And it's because they aspire to have somebody. Now, Darcy and his friend Bingley turn up at Netherfield. And all of the girls in the area are all aflutter with these 2 eligible bachelors who possess a very, very large fortune each. The problem with Darcy is prejudiced according to the social mores and strictures of the day. The Bennet family technically are beneath him. We're talking aristocracy level, whereas they are gentry, as it were, the lower upper class. And so when he gets into the frivolities and capers of village life and dancing, he doesn't want to come beneath himself from his station in his behaviour, because he is arguably a gentleman. And the way he rubs Elizabeth up the wrong way, through some very caustic remarks. Sometimes you do really want to throttle the bloke. In here is one of the worst proposals of marriage ever made, right? And it's hilarious, and I know all you Austinites, I know you're all giggling at it right now. But the real play in this story is how people behave towards one another based on assumptions and based on prejudices and based on pride. Now, it's interesting I mention assumptions because the original title of this was going to be First Impressions. Another fellow turns up called Wickham, a real gentleman. He's gallant, he's full of bonhomie, you know, he's accepting of everybody, he's elegant in the sense that he can put anyone at their ease, perfectly polished speech. And of course, Darcy, it doesn't have a lot of that. And so the first impressions, the contrast of these two is remarkable. And we see Elizabeth making judgments. In fact, we see everyone making judgments on first impressions. Even when we think of Elizabeth's friend, Charlotte, and her decisions and how others view that decision, it's all very judgmental. There's prejudices and pride in play. And that is the genius of this book. Jane Austen wrote a book which, on the face of it, is a lovely story. It's fun, there's good twists and turns, but it's a pool of clear water that runs deep, deep, deep. The longer you stare and ask yourself, was Elizabeth right to think that? Is she right to say that? Is she judgmental? Is Darcy right to behave the way he does? What about Wickham? What about Bingley? You also have the perfect foils within that. On top of that, I need to do a different video on Jane Austen, you know, about certain themes that run through all of the books, one of which is laughter and its place in society, because if you look at Lydia and Kitty, you'll know what I mean. I can't say any more because I don't want to give spoilers away. But what a great book. Simple to read, pretty short to be quite honest. What's this, 260 pages? That's not much at all. But you need to stare at it deeply. Watch the edges of it descend. Because on the face of it, it's just a very thin layer of water. But watch it, and the layers descend and descend. The longer you think about it, the more you can get out of this. So there are two of the main books left by Jane Austen. That is Emma and Mansfield Park, putting them in alphabetical order. I want you to make a guess now. Which one do you think I have got in second place? Have you said it? Well, this is the one I picked. Mansfield Park. These are old Wordsworths, by the way. If you notice, they match. They're quite nice. So, Mansfield Park. What happened to Jane Austen? When you consider she had written Northanger Abbey, I know it hadn't been printed, but her first full-length book was Northanger Abbey. Then she wrote Sense and Sensibility. Then it was Pride and Prejudice, I believe. Mansfield Park comes fourth. And what a sudden shift in writing. You see, the three, Northanger Abbey, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, she's very, like I say, ironic and sharply witty at cutting at the behaviours of people and the underlying motivations. She sort of lays them bare. And the absurdity of certain behaviours. But Mansfield Park sort of dispenses with the laughing tone and becomes far more annoyed. I would say this is different to all of the others in many respects. So our main character is Fanny Price. Now, she is taken in by her auntie and uncle because her mum's quite poor, married badly in Portsmouth. But Fanny gets sent there and she grows up with her cousins. Now, two of the cousins, girls, don't particularly like her because they're taught by their mother, Fanny is beneath you, so, you know, although you're with her, don't think that she should be your closest friend and don't bring yourself down to her level. So she gets treated quite badly. There are two brothers as well. One of them, Edward. Edward is a kind soul and thoughtful, a thinker, intelligent. And so's Fanny. She likes to read, she listens carefully, and she draws quiet conclusions in the background. In fact, you can't help but think there's this element of Jane Austen herself written in this. Interestingly, Jane Austen's mother did not like this book. She said, what happened? So different to the others. And she didn't find Fanny a particularly nice heroine. That's because she's got no luster. She is a quiet, ordinary, uninspiring character in many respects. She's never going to light a room up. She's probably not going to approach you to start conversation, but she runs deep. And that's the thing with Fanny. Now, into the scene come two other characters from London, from the good set, and they come down and they're a little bit bored, but when they meet up with Fanny and her cousins, they have a good time, and you see them go out for day trips. You get an insight into how they used to spend their time in the Regency. They put on a play, which is a little bit scandalous. You'll have to read it to work out why. You get the idea of adultery slipping in to this book. Now, that's not something you expect, from Jane Austen, or even from the early 1800s, to come out into a book. It's there, but they're sort of less talked about at that point. You know, the days of Sterne as, you know, Tristram Shandy, that's gone kind of thing, and it's not quite as couth to talk about. But that idea comes in. The idea of religion, the idea of deep-seated morals, the idea of your manners being one thing and your morals being elsewhere. Pretense. The ability to be swayed by charm, by looks, by youth, by the temptations of society, as opposed to being content with the more simple aspects of life. Fanny is a fly on the wall in this. Although she's the main character, she's a main character who observes the world around her. Edward is one of the best supporting role characters. It was actually somewhat inspired by the evangelical movement, would you believe? Jane Austen used to mock the evangelical movement. She's a bit, you know, overly zealous and a bit hoity-toity. But she did say maybe they're onto something, because the more she watched society and its beauty externally, but actually its corruption within, its fakery really, she began to wonder a little bit more about the sentiments of the evangelicals, which is sort of a revival of Puritanism in some respects, although not quite as far. And Mansfield Park is the result. This book, if you read it properly, and when I say properly, I just mean with deep thought and taking on Jane Austen's opinions here that she's trying to express, should give you pause for thought about what makes a really good character, what makes true depth of character, which anticipated the question that a lot of novels of the 19th century would discuss. You know, you think of Great Expectations, that's about character. You even think of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. You know, it's philosophical, but again, character. This comes up multiple times through the 19th century, and there's Austen making one of the most remarkable books. It's not fast-moving, I will say that. So if you want to start with the fast-moving one, I wouldn't start with Mansfield Park. If you like to think, if you like to judge the grounding values of individuals and see which ones work for the best, very much the book you want to go for. So that was second place, Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. So naturally, that means in first place is Emma. Now, I know plenty of you are screaming at the screen and threatening to switch me off, although loads of you will also agree. Emma is an unusual choice in many respects for the first place, and I'll tell you why. For the greater percentage of readers, Emma is the least likeable of all of the heroines. In fact, I think it was the infamous statement by Jane Austen, wasn't it, that I'm going to write a book in which nobody will like the heroine except myself. I disagree, because I like Emma. Anyway, I think Emma is charming. But Emma is a deeply flawed individual. She is a very young girl. She's just come into society. She's spoilt because she's the only daughter. Her dad is also, she's lost her mum, so her dad's a widower. And he indulges her, and so does her governess. And she rules the roost in her family home, which at the moment slips my mind. But it's a very, very well-to-do family home. She has some close friends and confidants, notably Mr. Knightley, who is a good friend of her father's, and who is a very sound, forgiving, balanced character, who doesn't mind a bit of frivolity, but also plays the big brother role in some respects, because he does have a sense of real decorum, not feigned decorum, not purely outward manifestations, but the manners spring from the correct value. But it's not just Knightley. So many characters come into this. The thing with Emma is she is an Imaginist. She sees love and the potential for love and matchmaking everywhere. The thing is, she doesn't need it. She never thinks she'll be married because she has possession of her home. She's in charge of everything. You know, her life is ideal, but she wants to make everyone else's life ideal, and she thinks she's sophisticated and capable enough in her youthful way to do it. So when a young girl comes within her orbit called Harriet, she endeavours to matchmake her with somebody else. Harriet also is fond of other people, but she's so inspired by Emma's grace and wittiness, and she is a very handsome girl, to use Jane Austen's expression, and her perfection of manners. Harriet just begins to trust whatever Emma says, and so you follow the intrigues of Emma trying to set Harriet up, with Harriet's, permission and working along, trying to bag herself a bloke. But it comes unstuck. And then you get the introduction of new characters who have appeared. They've appeared from London, and there's a mystery about them, and they've heard about them, and Emma is very intrigued about meeting particularly a Miss Fairfax. And then she meets her, but being young, there's that jealousy, and people pay her a lot of attention, and that sort of distracts from Emma. And then there's the Mr. Churchill. He turns up, and suddenly Emma's a bit like, ooh, he's nice. So you see that she is a very movable person, a changeable person. And that her strength of opinion at the beginning, which is so forthright, so dogmatic, so set, very quickly can sway. That her insights into human nature are not as sharp as you would think, as she thinks they are. Again, this is a critique where Jane Austen is watching particularly young ladies of her day, but she does see it in the men as well. She sees the foolishness, she sees the graspingness, particularly the clergy. There is a Mr. Elton in here who's not terrible. That's one thing about Jane Austen. You don't really get terrible characters. Maybe, I don't know, is Wickham? Bit of a bounder. But what you've got is just all these people trying to matchmake, trying to get on, move along. But Emma's trying to be the hub of it all. Emma wants to interfere with things. Emma tries to put on airs and graces, and there's this infamous, brilliant scene where just the words, just the simple sentence by Mr. Knightley, badly done, Emma, badly done, where she's really put in her place, where she feels totally ashamed of herself because she's trying to be so sophisticated, and she just gets a little hoity-toity. And he just sits her down. It's a brilliant, brilliant scene.
Badly done, Emma. Badly done.
And I can't give much more away. I know I'm sort of rambling around because I can't tell you the plot. It's so well written. It's so brilliantly developed. Its characters are very deep. And Emma, I think, is a wonderful character. Because surface reading, you will not like Emma. She meddles too much. She thinks too much of herself. She's too strident. But to be honest, how many of us are that? We don't think we are. We can be strident because we know we're right. Actually, that's what Emma is. We give our advice to everybody. We try and manipulate things with best intentions, which actually may not work out and can hurt people. So why judge Emma? She's a young girl who's making her way. What I love about her is she begins to learn. You see the changing, the mellowing of a character as life isn't quite as you see it. That you are not, you know, the little queen at the centre just because you grew up as the little princess who was at the centre of the family. That doesn't translate outwardly. We get again a mockery from a few characters. We get the mockery of fashion. Again, this is a theme that comes through her books and a theme that comes through a lot of books of the 19th century, particularly early to mid, the fashionable. And you get the idea of her getting bored as well because she's always trying to be fashionable. But there's one character I'm thinking of in particular, and I know if you've read this book, you'll know who I'm talking. Shocking lack of satin. So, yes, and always wondering about what's going on in the London fashion houses for dress and attire. Emma is just a superb character. I think she's the most real of all the characters. She's not as earthy as the other heroines. Fanny Price is connected to life. She's connected to naturalness. Anne Elliot, connected to naturalness, not just the refinement of society. Elizabeth Bennet marching through the field and getting muddy on the way over to see the Bingley sisters. Again, in touch with nature. Eleanor, the same. Not Emma. Emma is refined, but it doesn't make her a bad person. And there's a little lesson in sometimes we need to be knocked down a peg or two, don't we? But it's not whether you need correcting that makes you a dislikable character. It's how you respond. Give a person time. This is exactly the same. I would say a person, generally speaking, who doesn't like Emma in this will also be the kind of person that doesn't like Pip in Great Expectations. But the thing is, Emma is us. We are Emma in many aspects of our life, the same way as we all are Pip. So when we judge them harshly, what we're showing is we have the same blind spots that they do. This book, like the clear pool I talked about at the beginning, goes so deep and is actually, the longer you stare at it, so very, very clear, a surgery, a dissection of what it is to be a human being and what it also is to be a great friend. Because that's the thing. Emma's the main character. But where do all the lessons come from? What a book. What a book. In fact, I think I'm going to have to read it again very soon because it's such a good one. And it's one of her bigger ones. So on here, 400 pages. So, yes. Would I recommend Emma to be the first book you read? It depends on your style. It depends on what you like. If you just want to go by simplicity, I'll do a quick run through, a bit of a bonus, weren't planning this. But in my opinion, if you just want to go through the simplicity of the books, from story building upwards, I would start with Northanger Abbey, then Sense and Sensibility, then Pride and Prejudice. This is difficult. Then Mansfield Park, then Emma, and probably finally Persuasion. However, me ranking them doesn't come that order. It's in 6th place, Sense and Sensibility. In 5th was Northanger Abbey. In 4th was Persuasion, brilliant book. Remember, 1 to 4 could all equally be number 1. In 3rd place was Pride and Prejudice. Absolutely adore that book. In 2nd, Mansfield Park blew my mind because it's a deep, thoughtful work on a view of life, which is a bit different. And Emma was number 1 because as an actual developed story, I actually think story-wise there's more to this. The layering is much more complex. It's not as sober quite as Persuasion, if that's your turn, but I actually think it's the most real author, and I love heroines, and I love heroines and heroes like this, the ones who are genuinely flawed. I don't mean Hamasha with the critical flaw that destroys them. I'm talking a human who has to grow up, who has to develop in life, who makes all of the bungling mistakes that we all do while trying to look so smart and intelligent. That's Emma all over. And it's also got some other characters in here who I absolutely love, such as Mr. Knightley. I think is absolutely brilliant character. And the way he's handled by Jane Austen is brilliant. I also think Harriet is an absolute gem of a character in this book. Totally overlooked because of the sheer elegance and sparkle and prominence of Emma. But Harriet is wonderful. Now, please do me a favour. Down below, write your list. How would you rank Jane Austen's books? And if you want to share a brief explanation of why you put that order, by all means do it, because people read the comments and we can inspire each other to enjoy classic literature even more. So, until the next time I see you, I wish you joy in whatever you read.